Hey guys, so another Snake Solid video coming right at you, and this time it's not about the Persona 3 remake. Though I'm sure the second that there's any type of news, I'm gonna make like a billion videos on it again, but that's aside from the point. You guys have that type of game that you just like sitting down and playing when it's rainy, or it's snowing, or it's one of those calm nights? Sorry if you hear an echo, by the way. I'm kind of doing some stuff around the house while I record this. But you guys have that game that you just love playing when things are calm. It's like your calm game. I have that. It's a neat little game called Inscryption. Inscryption is like it's this card game, right? And you actually I should probably say no watching if you want to actually play it because I heavily recommend just playing Inscryption or just looking into it just because I really think it's a really good game. Inscryption is a card game, but it's a very unique card game in how it's presented. It has three very wildly different parts to it. I'll focus on Act 1 for today because Act 1's the part I really play the most. So Act 1 of Inscryption is within the confines of a cabin which is run by a man called Leshy, and it's immaculate with its vibes. I like the map unfolding, the cabin aesthetic, as well as the calm music that plays while you go through it. And even though it can be really hard to play through sometimes, and sometimes it could feel a little bit bullshit because, you know, it's a roguelike, go figure. That's what kind of happens in roguelikes, right? It just has immaculate vibes, and it's just fun to play even when I'm losing. It's fun to sort of build a bunch of cards together. So, how does it play? Well, I'll say it. It plays very well. It's very simple, but very easy to digest. Basically, you play cards from your hand by sacrificing things. I know it sounds gruesome, but don't worry, the art style makes this a lot easier to digest. Basically, you have two decks. You have a squirrel deck, and you have a deck with your actual attacking cards. Now, the scroll deck is what you're supposed to use to prepare your hand on your side as you will, because they're no cost and they don't really do anything except for take a hit. So what you do is that you play the squirrel and then you sacrifice it for something bigger. Depending on if you're playing Casey's mod or regular Act 1 Inscryption, of course, you might replace your squirrels with bees if this is Act 1, and in Casey's mod, your squirrels might not even be able to take a hit because of one of the challenges. Once you sacrifice the needed cards, you can play a bigger card, which, depending on what starter hand you have, would pretty much vary. The goal of the game is to tip the scale to the left of your playing mat, all the way to the side of your opponent, which would mean that you win. If your scales are tipped all the way towards you, however, that means you just lost. Though in Act 1 in Casey's mod, you have a second life, so it's not like losing is the worst thing in the world whatsoever. It's just highly inconvenient and not something you really want to have to do, you know, because it's a little bit frustrating. Just a little bit frustrating. You know how it is in these types of games if you like roguelikes. There's different types of costs. Of course, I already covered what sacrificing is, but every single time one of your creatures dies on the board, whether that be because you sacrificed it, or because it died from an enemy, or any other reason, it becomes a bone. When that creature's card becomes a bone, you can then spin that bone because some cards cost bones instead of sacrifice. These are very few and far between in Act 1 of Inscryption, especially since Act 1 focuses on blood cost, whereas the other acts focus on different things. This is also important since if you wanted to build a bone deck, which is extremely hard to do, you would have to find a way to get bones without playing any cards that were no costs. Now, I'm a bit iffy on this, because I kind of wish that there was more bone-centered things in Act 1, just because I really do think that bones could have been interesting, especially since later on in Inscryption there's some interesting parts about it, but that's besides the point. Other parts of Inscryption, such as the map traversal and how it unfolds, and the different nodes, and especially how Leshy acts as a pseudo DM the entire time. He acts as different characters, he wears masks and stuff like that and stuff. It just gives me a bunch of D&D vibes, which is something that I've wanted to get back into for a while now, just playing some D&D with some friends. The item use is incredibly dark and stuff. Like, there's a pair of pliers that you use to rip out teeth, the drop on the scale. There's, like, the eye that you can also do if you're playing Act 1 of Inscryption, like with the scissors. It's just wild. Another thing that you can do is, aside from battles, there's also events that can happen on the board. Like, you could come across some events that are not battles. For example, you could come across a event where your card is duplicated, or an event where your cards are combined, or a event where you can buy pelts, which can then be used to get better cards later on. It's pretty wild what can happen, and in Casey's mod they actually added even more map events, which are really, really cool. And then there's also things like sacrifice events. There's two different types of these. There's sacrificing something to the Bone Lord, which if you do this, it gives you a boon where you get a couple of extra bones at the start of every single fight that you get into. Of course, this is a little bit harder to do, since, you know, there's a finite amount of Bone Lord things you'll come across, and you get like one extra token per time, unless you sacrifice a Black Goat, of course. A Black Goat card gives you like +4 Bone Lord tokens, which is pretty cool. It's basically essential if you want to do a bone deck, but you know how it is. Another thing that's really immaculate about this game is the sound effects and the sound design in general. The music in Inscryption is really, really good. It doesn't matter what act we're talking about, each one of them has very good music. Act 1 has very soft, very atmospheric sounds, a lot of guitars stuff, basically. And that does well for the atmosphere of Act 1. Act 2 is trying to replicate the sort of music that would come from a computer game of the time, since within the lore of Inscryption, it is a computer game corrupted by a type of evil file, I guess. But in Act 3's machine sounds work really well with what it does as well, but I'm not going to cover those two very much today, maybe a different video. Another thing I want to talk about is just Casey's mod in general. I'm very appreciative that they added Casey's mod to Inscryption, just because Act 1 is my favorite in terms of the atmosphere and the sound design. It's just very, very nice. It kind of reminds me, it makes me kind of like, the atmosphere of Act 1 of Inscryption kind of makes me feel happy. It's like a feeling of sitting in your bed with a heated blanket on while your stinky dog lays on the couch snoring really loudly, but in a very comfortable way, you know? That very comfy type of snoring really loud. You know how it is, I'm sure. Everybody has probably that one game, but, you know, bit of a ramble once more, but, you know, I figured it would be fun to make another ramble video, and, you know, practice just talking fluently, just talking and practicing my speech skills, and, you know, try and get my editing time down, I guess. Anyways, this is Snake Solid. I will talk about Inscryption probably another day. You know, there's still Act 2 and 3 that I could cover as well. That's it. Have a great day.